Hi guys. Hi guys, it's Hugh again. Hey, listen, I am so excited about this week's edition. It is me, and I gotta confess, I have got a man crush on my new bestie, Angus Fletcher. Angus speaks my language, the language of crazy people, of narrative, of creatives. I nod. I agree with everything he said. I think this could be. Everyone wants shortcuts. Everyone's like, what's the best investment book to read? If you're seeking success in any aspect of life, I think what follows in the next hour or so is invaluable. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
And again, apologies. Hopefully, it should be fun, but it'll be somewhat chaotic.
Here's the thing. First of all, you don't ever have to apologize. I literally spent my entire life only working with creative people. And creative people are only sort of intuitive chaos, which I define as being different from chaos, which is just a bunch of nonsense, which never goes anywhere. Intuitive chaos is a kind of intricate, kind of slightly post-rational process where no one exactly knows what's happening, but you kind of feel that things are happening. And then at the end, boom, the proof.
Well, I mean, you are living proof of the wisdom of my sports psychologist from many years back previously. When I used to watch, I worked with this larger than life, remarkably successful hedge fund manager in London. But there was an element to him where he carried a lot of conceit. He was very full of himself. And I don't know if it was I always want to say Presbyterian Scottish background, because that kind of sounds, it sounds more than its parts. I mean, I'm Catholic for one thing, but I was troubled by that. I would watch and I would ask myself, one of the thought bubbles was, how you win the men's or ladies 100 meters dash in the Olympic Games. It's in a time of 9 something nanoseconds. And you can't really distinguish between the people who make it to the final. I don't know, it was 12 people. You can't, one would imagine, kind of have similar DNA quirks. They are magnificent, vessels. And yet, one wins, and it's at that one moment someone sees the zeitgeist and said, this is me, I have this conceit, I am better than everyone, and boom, it's their chest that crosses the finishing line. But my concern was always, and I think it's valid, that with conceit you're always one step closer to damnation, to bad things happening.
And, yeah, well, just in a biological sense. I mean, so first of all, you're absolutely right. You have to have aggression, and you have to be able to seize the initiative, and you have to kind of strategically have ego in moments where you need to kind of seize that moment where other people are hesitating, and you need to go beyond your own confidence and impose your will briefly on the situation. But if you make the mistake of thinking that that's more than a strategy, if you actually start to think, I am a god, then what ends up happening is you immediately become inflexible, and you get wiped out by change. And, we just know that one of the characteristics of high-performing individuals is they have an ironic view of their own success. If you start telling them how successful they are, they immediately have this, sort of, oh, it was luck or absurd or whatever, and because they know that if you start pinning them on that, they die. I mean, that's extinction. You have to move past that. So anyone who takes himself that seriously, especially if you're associated with them, if they're leading your organization, jump off that ship, because they are going to drive it into oblivion.
Well, I did eventually, but before I did, to your point, I was appointed, and I was appointed essentially to reject the null hypothesis, and the null hypothesis was everything. So but then we ended up whatever. But I was seeing my psychologist, because because I'd like to win the race. I would like to control the zeitgeist, be the zeitgeist. And they were like, ask an expert a difficult question, and they will resolve it by answering another question. And so the psychologist said, no, you got it all wrong. Actually, it's so evident that your mind is creative, and you should be hanging out with more creative people, you know. And I was like, okay, great. Hold on a second. I'm going to phone Bono. What are you doing on Sunday? Let's do lunch. And you know, the guy actually thought I was talking. I was like, you know, anyway. So you're creative, I'm creative, and we're going to try and see what sticks over the next 45 minutes or whatever. Because for me, we've kind of just met and engaged, and the background is. Well, I should allow you to introduce yourself. Why don't you introduce yourself? Because you know.
Yeah, why don't I introduce myself? Because I know everything about myself clearly because we're all transparent to ourselves. So yeah, I mean, and maybe I should explain a little bit why I'm even on this podcast, because basically, technically, my expertise is in creativity, or sort of in thinking about how the brain works. And I got my start in neuroscience, and it was at a time when everyone just thought the brain was a computer, and it just took in data and processed this data, and we just kind of had to figure out how to. And it was just immediately obvious to pretty much any sensible person that the brain is not a computer. The brain takes on almost no information. Most of the information it does take on, it ignores or bends or distorts, to the extent that humans are powerful, and we are extraordinarily powerful. I mean, we have taken over this planet in almost no time. To the extent that we're powerful, it comes from the fact that we are emotional and that we are creative. I mean, those are the secrets. And so basically, I decided I wanted to learn how emotion and creativity worked. So I started studying the arts. I became a kind of rogue neuroscientist, went off, got my PhD, started studying Shakespeare at Yale, then I went to Stanford, where I met people, Pixar, places like that. And now, I published a book, a couple of recent books that have kind of sort of caught the zeitgeist and have been buzzy by people like Gladwell and people like that. And as a result of that, I get this wacky phone call from a professor at Chicago Booth, which is kind of known as the kind of nerdiest business school of them all here in the United States. And he says, Angus, do you want to do some business consulting? And I'm basically like, I don't know anything about business. He's like, that's fine. So we start doing that. That starts working. I get a phone call from the US military. I start working with the US military. I've now written the strategic guide for creativity for the US military. And it's all basically because, like you, Hugh, I do not think that the human brain is rational. I do not think that life is rational. I think that life is chaos and creativity is initiative. And I think that we have to have the courage to accept that and to empower the people around us, not just ourselves, not just kind of be Nietzschean Ubermenches who go around imposing our will, but to build educational systems and to build cultures that nurture people from a young age to be brave and to be imaginative. So anyway, that's who I am. I'm a professor at Ohio State, Project Narrative, the world's leading academic institute for the stuff that I do. And I'm honored to be here.
And you're here because I had a hedge fund career, an actual fund for 15 years, but a career much, much longer than that. And I find myself nodding with everything you're saying. And I had read articles on these wonderful aforementioned books, which I would encourage people to seek out, because I rejected the model of managing other people's money. I, as a hedge fund, and at the time, before we had Facebook and social media, kind of winner takes all business models, profit models, one could say, somewhat tongue in cheek, that the highest return on intellectual capital was the remuneration of a hedge fund manager. There's 2 in 20, and indeed, with the people who've got the figures that stack up, it can be more than that. Some guys take 40% of the profits, etc. And so I thought logically, one could assume that with that remuneration, it would attract the smartest folk in the planet. And my success would be determined by my performance vis-a-vis the smartest people. And so I thought it didn't make a heck of a lot of sense to try and outsmart the smartest people. And so instead, I deployed absurdity. I set my stall out to think, well, why isn't it that being just gifted with this abundance of natural intelligence, it doesn't guarantee you success. What is it that gets in the way of success? And typically it's kind of the serendipity of life, that when major events happen, we're constantly pushed back with, well, who would have thought that would happen? And I was like, well, that was my franchise. And so for me, I at one point ended up being responsible for about $1.5 billion. And really, I think this podcast really is going to serve as a form of public counseling. You're going to counsel me for free, thank you very much. Then everyone else is going to go, oh, really, narcissism again. But I hired funny, interesting people. One kid came and was like, oh, I should have taken that big glass of whiskey because I was a bit nervous. Like, it's 7:30 in the morning. And he was a kind of waspish New York kind of Woody Allen character, but he was into kind of really obscure rap music. And I thought, that's a great combination. Come on board. And I didn't really want edge. And they use this awful, that you got to have the edge. That's your performance comes from the edge. And the gig is that by ponying up with the investment banks, they tell you, they share the secret sauce. Hey, we think you should do this and that. And so I rejected all of that. You couldn't reach me. And instead, I just found that I was like we all are, we're processing events around us. And for me, it was like a conscious REM, and I needed something that was the articulation of something of prose. It could music lyrics, words, and the sheer joy and the perfection when it just comes together. And it could be about anything. I quoted studies on lesbianism and whatever. The more shocking, the more fun. Yeah, but it acted as keys inside my mind, which would allow me to guess at these kinks and unusual portals that would perhaps visit us in the future. And so that whole your thing about creativity, which is language based, I thought we got to talk. So I'm talking too much. What do you make of that?
No. Well, okay. So first of all, let me just give you the reason why I think you were so successful and are going to be so successful. And the key that I would just say to your audience, the key to success is matching your uncertainty to the uncertainty of the times, or matching your chaos to the chaos of the times. And the reason that the world is currently full of a lot of very overconfident and boring people who are very successful is because they have controlled the system within an inch of its life. They've basically bullied an artificial state of stability into the world, which has allowed them, like little machines and robots, to just extract currency and capital from it. But that system is going to break quickly. We can already see it shattering. And when it shatters, you need to match the situation with yourself. And so when the situation becomes volatile, you need to become volatile. When the situation becomes uncertain, you need to become uncertain. When the situation becomes ambiguous and complex, you need to become ambiguous and complex. And all these people who have all these MBAs and all these degrees in economics and data and all the rest of it are going to get wiped out because they are just going to be sitting still while life explodes. And the tactic that you're talking about, the reason that was successful in 2008 is because you were preparing for that moment of chaos. And, that's the work I do now. I mean, I work a lot. I can't talk too much about the details, but I work with U.S. Special Operations, so I work with basically elites who go into these situations where there is utter chaos, no knowledge whatsoever, and they thrive in those situations. And how do they do that? They do it the same way that you did it. It is to embrace the absurdity of life fearlessly. It's not to try and control life, but to allow yourself to become life. And by doing that, you don't literally see the future. I mean, there's no way to actually see the future as a human, but you open yourself to the points that whereas everyone else is still stuck in the past, you're actually living in the present. If you can open yourself so fully that you're living in the present, it's the equivalent of being in the future compared to everyone else. That's as far as we can go, right? Yeah. And you hit that moment. And when you hit that moment, you were reacting at the speed of life. And so you were winning. And that's why it's possible to make $100 million in a day, because when everyone else is still caught yesterday, it's like you have the lottery ticket from tomorrow and you just cash it. So, I mean, that's why your approach was so successful. That's why, once they started to kind of screw down on the financial market and impose order, this fake order, this institutional order, your approach no longer worked, because the only way to survive in this new fake system is to be regular. But that system is going to smash, and when it smashes, there's going to be a new wave of people who have that ability.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is so right. It accords with my interpretation of events, because my creativity or whatever did allow me to see and profit from the events of 2008, and the consequences of those epic dramas were to come back and actually try and impose more order on me, and the funds and the regulation and how I had to staff it and what I had to do. And to your point, I was choked off the creativity, and I couldn't really continue. I wanted, so like with the elite, these elite members of the special services, they have no choice but to confront disorder and chaos, and I love that your quote, the speed of life, because like with these quant funds, they're kind of challenging and trying to overcome the speed of light in terms of gaining preposterous, like silly margins, but it's really about the speed of life. But so their speed of life, these operatives are they are confronted with chaos, and you're saying for the rest of us, so these business executives or my peer group sitting in Manhattan, they are excelling as well, but they have imposed or surrounded themselves with order. So how do they get that special operative chaos? It's kind of, I find that there's a juxtaposition where one elite athlete, if you will, the special services, are confronted and faced with it. They have no choice but to deal with it. The others who are still excelling are abolishing it. And how do they both
So
run
first
at the
of
same
all,
time?
let's be honest about the special forces. Let's be honest about special operations. The military never wanted them. The military never wanted them to exist. If the military had its way, we would still be in the 18th century with kind of Napoleonic line formations and everybody marching in lockstep to a drum. The whole entire military psychology is discipline, order, regulation, all these kinds of things. But the thing I love about the military is it's pragmatic. And the military realized after the American Civil War and then after World War I, in which you basically had these hyper-logical armies that achieved no gain, they realized we need to be guerrilla fighters. We actually need to flip this model, and we need to kind of cultivate. And that's where you get the British SAS from. And of course, the American system has switched over almost entirely in terms of the way it actually fights to special operations, even though the main bulk of the military is not special operations. Special operations does almost all the military stuff. And the rest of the military just almost does kind of logistical backup and whatnot, So the military has seen that. And they've seen that necessity. And you know what? Big business is starting to see that too. The reason I get brought in so much is every company I go to, they're basically like, look, we bought into this data idea. We bought into AI, and it's not working. And the reason it's not working is completely obvious, because data and AI just predict yesterday. They're incredibly fragile when it comes to, because statistics does not work on an N of 1. Statistics cannot work on it. It just cannot work. It cannot function. So all these executives are starting to realize, oh my goodness, this is not working. And they're on these, basically, they know they're on the Titanic. They know the iceberg is out there. And they're saying, just like the military did, we need to build special operations. We need to build special operations. And so they want the same training that, me and my team are delivering to the special operations community. They want them in business. And so we're bringing teams out of special operations to team business. And my hope in doing that is not to somehow create like a new predatory militarized business. It's to create a business in the image of special forces, because special forces, whatever you might think of them, these people are extraordinary. They're sacrificial people. They're people who live with joy and intensity. They're people who can are incredibly psychologically resilient, who love others, who care, who have, and if we could build a kind of dynamic, agile, caring, loving version of business on the model of special operations, our world would be transformed, as opposed to this kind of predatory, oligarchical, kind of top-down, narcissistic nightmare, this kind of empty materialism where people just chase cash instead of actual materialism, which is the body and the heart and the beauty of life. So that the overall thing I guess I'm trying to say is special forces didn't come about because the military wanted them. They were compelled to by life.
Necessity.
And this is going to be compelled to in the same way.
Do you know, it's so funny because, again, dipping into my experience, very, very recent experience, I have the honor to call a friend one of those special services operatives who has had a full career of full engagement, with the top. There's a hierarchy even in these things at the top of it. And he has just been hired by a most excellent financial player. And that's what they're doing now. They're surrounding all of their senior team. They must be consulting. It was too close to be true. Their senior team now, they are paired up with special operatives from all the different services, the national services. So like you say, it's happening. One of the things I thought, it sounds like it was the SES was the front runner for most of these things. And a lot of that, it sounds like cabaret, very British, preposterous at the beginning and always makes a great read, and had to suffer calamities initially where things, obviously, they're not guaranteed to work, and they were taking a lot of risk in terms of seemingly preposterous and up against, I told you that wouldn't work, but it came to pass. I wonder the special operatives having to kind of come back and bring you in. Is that a function of where I found myself was I set myself up to be the pirate. So that's the SES, we're the pirates to the Royal Navy. Go out and kind of, find the kinks. But after 50 years, or SES would have been the kind of late 30s, early 40s, so 80 years, what can happen is the pirate, and I see this with hedge funds, and it kind of happened to my organization. I went from being the pirate to becoming the Royal Navy. How do you stop that? And is that what happened? The special forces suddenly turned out and was like, we're now regimented. How do we break it up again? Was that happening, do you think?
So I'm going to be honest. I don't think that special forces, special operations in this, I don't want to say that they were becoming regimented, but I do want to say that if you want to maintain that pirate edge, you have to maintain it every day. And so you have to get up every day and be like, what am I going to do different? And you see this with high performing creatives. You see it in yourself, is there's a restlessness and an intensity and a desire for almost self-demolition, where you're like, okay, I know that worked yesterday, which is why I have to break it up today. What worked yesterday is not going to work today, so I have to keep reinventing myself. And when you're around successful creatives, their rate of personal change and personal growth is astonishing. And that's the way it is also with these organizations, these elite organizations, is they're constantly deleting what worked yesterday and throwing themselves into the new. And so, I can tell you, it was the first time I found myself inside, one of these places, it was surreal. Because, I'm the first person, with my training, I have a PhD in Shakespeare, and I'm walking in here and I'm sort of explaining to these guys, and women, I should say too. One of the actually most charming kind of moments, maybe not to go too far, I don't want to reveal anything that's off the record, but, there are women in there who are literally 100 pounds and can just break you in half. So it's an entire, it's this kind of myth of male strength and male supremacy. Special operations is just interested in different. They're just interested in different. If they haven't seen it before, that's what they want. And so I'm in there doing my stuff the same way you're doing your stuff in the financial industry and causing.
There's always quick fixes. There are always apples that have fallen off the tree kind of thing to tidy up. How much of it was that? How much of it was, oh my God, do we have to start at the beginning? Because you're dealing with a magnet for creatives like, for that they already exist. So what was pushing them away? I still don't get why they needed to call upon your, I'd call you,
It's a kind of push and pull thing. I mean, I think, first of all, they're always anxious for new ideas and they're always seeking and searching. And I think that, you've seen this in your own life where even when you have everything you want more, I mean, the creative is just restless. It's a restless life. People don't understand creatives because you win one day and you get up the next morning feeling unfulfilled and you want more. And that's part of the cycle of the creative, which I think other people don't necessarily get. But I mean, I think we have to be honest that the American military is at a breaking point. I mean, you just look at Afghanistan. I mean, I don't have to tell anyone what's going on in Afghanistan right now. And I think there is the sense that, things do need to change. I think there's also a real concern just in general, because we kind of feel like our world might be on the edge of some kind of existential crisis. I mean, there's an almost apocalyptic feel about the world right now, where people are wondering, like, have we hit the edge of time? Like, what's going on in the future? And there are these moments occasionally in human history where you hit these moments where everyone just suddenly has a kind of collective freak out. And I think that is percolating everywhere, including into the military. And there's this just sense of we have to try something new, because clearly what we're doing now is not adequate. We need new ideas. And from the perspective of the military, it's not just about having new ideas, it's about having new ideas that you can be aggressive with. Like, the military doesn't want to just go out there and just kind of like wander around and kind of try things. They want to say, what can I operationalize to be on the front foot and go in hard? And it's the same thing, I think, when you're dealing with hedge funds, is you at a certain extent, you can't just kind of mess around and dally around and dither around. At some point, you have to go in hard and aggressive, and you have to kind of operationalize and mobilize. And that's what's different from, say, childhood play or something. And so one of the reasons I've been brought in, by the military specifically, is because my approach to creativity is very much about initiative, aggression, going forward in the absence of certainty, and just treating that as a normal process of life, as opposed to the way that we try and build our society now, which is prepare everything ahead of time, have everything planned, everything curated, make sure it's going to work, freak out if anything is a little bit out of place. Instead, no, go forward and then train your brain to react off chaos.
And it's so the terms that I use is playfulness and curiosity. I always tell the tale about being interviewed for my daughters to go to a very expensive, fee-paying school, whatever. And I met with the new headmistress, and it was in a Georgian, wonderful, beautiful building in Notting Hill. And there was a deck of stairs they had to climb. The girls have little pretty hats and uniforms, and they had to walk up, doff the cap, like curtsy, and then enter. Great Victorian drama. And this lady, I'll never forget, she was speaking our language, and she said to me on the first day, I joined the first girl on the first step, and I said, I'll race you to the top. Yeah. And that's what I think this gig is. This is what we're trying. And she's like, and my old boss was that. It's like, let's he was playful, like we were kind of crazy, playful people. We did stupid things.
Yeah. And to your point, if I can just jump in here,
please.
It's not just play, it's the combination of play with competition. Because I mean, I think that's to keep you can just play and mess around or just kind of get finger paints on the wall. But when all of a sudden you combine play with competition, that's when you get this creative engine. When you have competition without play, that's what we have now. Competition with just logic and rules, that's sterile and destructive. But what you're talking about is play plus competition equals growth.
Does play plus competition in a child, does that get confused for being naughty? In the sense, because it's like, oh, what if I do it? Like, they told me not to do it. What if I do it? Boom,
Yes. What they're trying to do in that situation is they're trying to compete essentially against you, against the rules. They're trying to say, can I impose my will on this environment? Can I break the laws? It's not just play in a kind of hippie way of just kind of messing around and acting. It's aggressive. It's challenging. And children do that all the time. If you have kids, you know this, they're constantly challenging all the time. And I love that about kids. I mean, they want to win, but they want to win on their own terms. They want to make the rules their way, and they're challenging you in that regard. And I think we miss that about children, just how competitive they are, but not in the way that adults are competitive, not for cheap, silly things like trophy and money, but competitive in an existential sense, to be like, I want to win this moment. I want this moment to be an extension of me as opposed to an extension of you.
No. And I wanted to ask I find myself, so I'm sure everyone else thinks creatives as a genre. Like I said to you, I went to the psychologist and I'm pretending to call Bono. So I'm calling a singer, a rock star, a rap star, whatever, a film star. And what is it with this is arguably preposterous, because I am assuming that form of creative seems to become very vulnerable there's a dark side to it which requires the supplementation of drugs and a lifestyle which is not to their benefit. And I feel like the creative has been joined with that. I find people just create images of who they want you to be, and so for me, my things are kind of gonzo, and so I was fighting it initially, but you get all this data feedback. People make responses and they make observations, and it's all they think I'm some kind of major drug abusing kind of weird rock star kind of, and it's like, so you don't fight that. If people want that, they've created that image, and it's kind of disrespectful to say, oh no, that's not me. But what I mean is, but they still associated, they're like, to be that form of creative, you've got to be like dangerously a little bit out of control and being vulnerable to.
No. So first of all, that's complete bullshit. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear on this podcast, but it's it's total bullshit. I mean, so first of all, in all the work I do with special forces, and there's a tons of neuroscience on this, drugs do not actually sustain long-term creativity. Drugs create burnout. Yeah. If you want to have sustainable, resilient creativity, do not take drugs. In the short term, they will boost your creativity, but they don't really boost your creativity. What they actually do is they decrease your logic. And what you have to think is there's two kind of operating systems in your brain that are kind of warring all the time, logic and creativity. And the drugs kind of blow out the logic and allow the creativity to come to the front, but then they blow out the creativity. And in reality, what you want to do is you want to train up your creativity so that you can use it when you need to. And then when you don't, put it in the background, so it can be safe, because if you're going to be a creative, you have to kind of live a kind of guerrilla life. So the first thing is drugs are not the long-term answer. Second of all, the idea that like rock stars or what have you, or Van Gogh are archetypal creatives, every career, every profession has creatives in them. If you look at the top people in a profession, or the people who are responsible for setting, the new practices in that profession, they're all creatives. I mean, I've had the chance to work with billionaires in tech. They're creative, teachers can be incredibly creative. It's the kind of middle sediment of every profession that is not creative. And the same thing goes for musicians or painters. There's a ton of very non-creative musicians and painters who just follow what other musicians and painters have done. They just imitate, Yeah. And so creativity is not domain specific at all. It's a general quality, and it comes from courage, not from chaos. The chaos comes from the world. The world is inherently chaotic. You as a creative do not need to be chaotic. You just need to open yourself to the world. And that takes courage, because to open yourself to the world involves the threat of self-extinction. Yeah. You have to do that. And that is the thing that most people can't do. And so what ends up happening is most people, they develop ego, or they develop walls. They try and, you have the suburbs, for example, where everything is nice and ordered. You can go get your milk for, whatever price, and all this kind of stuff. And what the creative is constantly saying is, I want to go to the limit edge, and I want to be brave because I only live once. And it's the creative who, through that courage, actually helps keep everything alive. because it's the creative who generates the next. I mean, doctors, there are creative doctors out there. If there were creative doctors, we would have no vaccines.
Yeah.
You know, that came from creativity. So all these things keep everyone else alive. And most people just kind of follow in the wake of creatives. And then, you know, I think largely due to a mix of awe and insecurity, like to stereotype creatives as somehow either crazy or almost prophets, you know, when the reality is anyone can be a creative, literally. You don't have to be smarter to be a creative. You know, you just have to have that courage, because whatever your natural aptitude is, whatever your natural domain is, if you add your courage to that, you will create in that. You will innovate in that. And that's basically what I try and tell people all the time is you're just in you now, you have this capacity, but it's just fear and to a certain extent laziness, because it's easier just to kind of go along with the routine. And it's scary and challenging to make yourself vulnerable. So most people just don't. But you're completely right. It's complete fabrication.
No. Well, I think that it makes so much sense in that it kind of explains actually the limited shelf life of the creative pop star, rock star. You know, like not to go heavy on the Rolling Stones, but you know. What did they produce after about 1982 or something, apart from money, you know? And that's that none of them persist. I mean, they persist with a career, but peddling the back catalogue before it got just wiped out by the silly stuff. I wanted again this notion of a dark side with creativity. I like everyone. I've been fascinated by Steve Jobs. And again, my fascination came from working very closely with someone that I had a great deal of admiration for, but up close, like all of us, you see flaws, you know, and become very aware of the flaws. And Steve Jobs is someone who seemed to fit that creative, but with flaws. You know, I would wish to be unkind or whatever, but he would seem to have been a very challenging person to love. And I have 3 children, and I've found that part of me, I've been a child. Like when I was a child, I was the opposite. I was a grown-up. I was the most mature, well, not mature, like strange 10-year-old, right? You know, and now I'm no longer 10. And the problem that I had with the child rearing, bringing up, breeding was fine. That was kind of easy. But, you know, the problem was they were my competition, because I go back to being a 10-year-old. That's my go-to place, is this 10-year-old kid. And so when I'm surrounded with like the other 10-year-olds and they're getting preferential treatment, I kind of threw hissy fits. So I was drawn to reading, you know, the biography of Steve Jobs' first child, the daughter. And again, it's harrowing. And so maybe that's just one person, but is there a dark side to the creative?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, let's just be honest. There's a dark side to humans, and there's a dark side to life. Life is an accident for no reason. I mean, this is Darwinism. We just know this. There's no reason we're here. People die all the time horrifically for no reason whatsoever. And fools all the time get promoted randomly to positions above us from which they proceed to domineer and make the rest of our lives hell, you know? So, I mean, life is a tragedy and it is an absurd nonsense. And so, yes, there's a dark side to life. And so therefore there's a dark side to us as humans. I mean, humans were not designed. I mean, until recently we had this myth that somehow we kind of were in the image of God or something. And it's like, no, we're apes who learn to wear pants. And, you know, when you look at how apes behave, you know, you get a pretty strong sense. So, I mean, so the first thing I would just say is, yeah, absolutely. There's a tragic side to creatives, but I don't want to overstate other people. I mean, other people are dark too. And I think one of the main problems I just have with, you know, the way a lot of people, there's a kind of pettiness in the world where people often like to magnify people's faults, particularly nowadays. We live in this insane world where everyone just sits on the sidelines and just judges everyone on Twitter, as if somehow it's like everyone's gone back to being 14 years old in the back of the classroom mocking authority. And I just think that it's so much easier to be negative than it is to embrace the positive. So I just want to put out there that I think the positive of a creative way outweighs the negative, but sure, yeah. And one of the common things, obviously institutionally, is as a creative, you struggle with the fact that you're kind of ahead of everyone else. You're living in the future. And that makes you impatient often. That can make you irritable. You often don't, it's like, why do I have to keep explaining the same thing over and over and over again to you people? Why don't you see this? This is common among creatives, is they get frustrated, they get exasperated, they get bored, they get irritated, And
so they get labeled troublemakers.
Yeah, no, exactly. All these kinds of things, and so that's a big thing. Another thing is Steve Jobs is not just a creative. Steve Jobs is also an innovator. And the difference between a creative and an innovator is an innovator kind of imposes his creativity on the marketplace and changes things. And if you're going to impose a new idea on people, that's really hard unless you're really aggressive. Part of what he did, and I know a lot of people who worked closely with him, and obviously I have associations and connections, which I won't go into here. But part of what he did was he was determined not to lose his clarity of vision. And so, he would open himself to chaos. I mean, his favorite work, by the way, as you probably know, is King Lear. Why? The explosion of the mind, the explosion of the mind, the absurdity of everything. But then once you hit that moment of clarity after the explosion, you then drive with that single point of light. That's the innovation part. The creativity is the chaos. The innovation is the driving forward. And so he was just ruthless in imposing that vision on the people around him because he wanted to make it real. And so a lot of what people associate, I think, with the kind of negative aspect of creatives is often actually innovators as opposed to creatives. It's actually people who are attempting, through fire and hell to take their creative vision and impose it on the world. And so that's a different kind of, dark side. But yeah, of course, I mean, as humans, we all have dark sides. I just think on a certain level, the idea that humans wouldn't have dark sides is just a relic of this religious thinking that somehow we're all supposed to be virtuous and good. And that's not life. Life is every strength is a weakness, every weakness is strength.
And at the very beginning, you were out there challenging the status quo. Everyone thinks that at the beginning, everyone thought the brain was like a computer. Nature's built on our forms. So it's not a computer. What is it?
That's a great question. I mean, basically, so to be clear, the fact that the brain is not a computer does not mean that it's not a machine. It's not magic. It's not mystical. I'm not here to say that there's some kind of magical consciousy thing in there. It's a machine, but it's a different kind of machine. And, there's a kind of failure of imagination among people nowadays to imagine a machine other than a computer. But literally everything around you, a wrench is a machine, a combustion engine is a machine. None of these computers, they operate differently. And so our brain is a biological machine. And I think the most important thing about the brain, which differentiates it from a computer, is it doesn't think in data, it thinks in action. It thinks in action. Computers can actually not think in action because action requires a cause and an effect, which require two different timestamps, and computers can only think in the eternal mathematical present tense. So they literally can only think in equations. They can't think in actions. The human brain is constantly thinking in actions. And that's why creativity in the human brain comes down to original actions, doing things in a different way, not just having ideas or associations. And that's why so much of human creativity is performative. And that's why the human brain is a performance engine. It creates new performances. And a big part of what I think makes the brain special, and you discovered this yourself, is it can make its own method in the madness, which is to say a computer just always does the same thing. All computers have the same three rules, and or not. They just do them all the same way. Every computer is always the same. Human brains can invent their own operations. So your brain can work differently from my brain. And we can all train our brains to work differently. And then we can put that difference and diversity together which is what happens again in elite teams, is you have a bunch of people who are all different from each other. And then that diversity scales because it increases our overall adaptability by making us all more flexible. Because in some situation, right, there's 100 million things that you're good at, Hugh, that I'm not good at. So if we get in that situation, boom, we just hand control over to you. And then there's maybe one or two things that I'm good at that you're not good at. So then we flip in those situations, bam, it's me, you know? And then we have some other team members. And that ability of the human brain to diversify and be different and invent original actions, become its own kind of processor. That's what we know about the brain. As to exactly how it works, I mean, you know, I've written a bunch of stuff on it. A lot of other people have written a bunch of stuff on it. I think it's an enduring mystery at the moment, but you know.
Okay. And what I love, because you have this thing about forget these, you know, the obsession for, what do they call, virtual glasses, whatever, with 3D virtual, whatever, you know, like it's called a book. A book is and also it's about the conceit of modernism, that somehow we are superior to those who came before us, and what you reveal actually. So if you reveal the genius of books, and that we have to read more, and indeed one of the tragedies which I see with my kids is these damn telephones. Kids don't read. You know, they don't read. Time is taken up elsewhere, and reading allows you to. It's a computer game where something happens, and you're making all the decisions even before you're living in that. It's not and or not. It's maybe what if you're actually living on. You're concluding the book before the book concludes, etc. And because we are no different from the Looney Tunes or the geniuses from 200, 300, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. There's so much material that we can read and learn. But what is it what are we doing there? We're just lubricating the mind. We're forcing the mind to make decisions. What are we doing? What is it that you think is the great virtue of that exercise?
Yeah. So first of all, let me just say that I am not a fan of this idea of decision-making as being important. This is all you hear now in business schools and life is you need data. And why do you need data? To make decisions. The key to life is not making a decision, because to make a decision, that implies the options are on the table in front of you already. The key to life is to invent a new path, not to make a decision. So, this is the classic thing of Oedipus, right? Oedipus arrives at the fork of the road. He says, I can only go two ways. Well, no, actually, you can go an infinite number of ways at a fork in the road, you know? A computer can't, but you can, you know? And that's why I think this whole emphasis on decision-making is nuts. That's what computers do, and that's why we crush them at everything. So why are we training ourselves to think like a computer? So first of all, to your point, the whole point of a book is to open possibility. You were talking about it there with this sense of the conditional, what if? That sense of counterfactual reasoning is a kind of technical term to be used for it. But basically, you can invent your own road. And what happens, the first thing when you get into a book is you enter a world which is different from your world, what operates on different rules. And then your brain sucks up those rules and starts to say, okay, how could I act differently in this world than in another world? And then you're given a character. And then you say, well, what if I was that character? How would I operate differently if I was that character? And then you're given a plot, and then you're told, okay, well, how would I interact with this plot? So it's this dynamic action. Again, it's about action, not about data. You are acting in this space over and over and over again. And so the first thing it does is just build huge amounts of creativity, huge amounts of imagination. And it's
so that sounds like it's a gym. It's a gym for the brain.
Yes. Yeah. And this is one thing that people don't realize nowadays. People have People are just obsessed with getting things as quickly as possible. This thing happened in the Middle Ages where no one actually wanted to read books anymore. So they literally reduced them all down to what they called a single sentence. So instead of reading Oedipus, you would just read a sentence. The sentence would be like, pride is bad. And people do the same thing nowadays. No one wants to read anything. They just want to have like a sentence handed to them, as if somehow the sentence is power. Like, I'm not going to read Machiavelli. Right? I'm not going to read Machiavelli. I'm just going to read someone's Cliff Note version of Machiavelli. And Machiavelli is the ultimate narrative writer. So if you want to understand Machiavelli, you got to read Machiavelli. You got to go. He uses these narrative techniques all through the Prince, all through the Discorsi. So anyway, you got to immerse yourself in a gym in the same way that you can't just think about having a workout. and then be stronger, you have to like work your muscles. You actually have to read the books. I mean, you discovered this with the poetry. You have to make time every day. And then people say, why are you wasting that time? Well, it's the same thing people say about you getting on a treadmill. Why are you wasting that time on the treadmill? You're not actually going anywhere. Ha, 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 idiot. And you're like, well, actually, what I'm doing is I'm strengthening my heart so I can crush you. And the same thing with like, why am I reading this poetry? So I'm building my psychological resilience so I can crush you, you know? And I'm coming for you right now with my copy of Sylvia Plath. So watch out. So that's the core thing, is it is a workout. And it's not just a workout for creativity. It's also a workout for your emotions. And, you know, people don't like to talk about emotions nowadays. So they like to pretend that somehow like emotions are feminine or embarrassing or ridiculous or a malfunction or whatever. Heart is almost everything in life. Heart is almost everything in life. You know, our word for heart is courage, courage, heart, right? Old French for heart. You need guts. You need heart in this life to do anything. That comes from reading books. And also books are therapy. I mean, and again, this is something, you know, I mean, therapy is one of these things where it starts to get stereotyped as weak or whatever. Greek tragedy was invented as therapy for veterans in Athens. You know, if you're a veteran and you want to sneer at Greek tragedy, that's fine. But if you're someone who hasn't served in combat and watched your friend die, then you shouldn't be sneering at therapy, because, you know, veterans wanted it in the ancient world. Veterans wrote Greek tragedies. Veterans got therapy. So it's also about this therapeutic thing, because if you're going to be a creative, you're going to get damaged. I mean, that's the number one rule about being a creative. You don't know if you're going to succeed as a creative, but you know you're going to get hurt, and you're going to get hurt bad. And you know that because you get hurt bad, you're going to get scars and you're going to get fear. And then you have to say to yourself, am I going to live in fear? Am I going to constantly turn inward and just dwell and ruminate on my scars? Or am I going to be anti-fragile? Am I going to take that hurt and use it as strength and turn it outwards and become more powerful? And that's what literature does. When you read literature, it helps you with these process of catharsis and growth and emotional and psychological resilience. Mm. And again, that's why we've got special operations reading Jane Austen. Yeah. I mean,
but it's to mix it up, isn't it? You've got to mix it up.
Yes.
Well, and it just Jane Austen would be just the 180 degrees, or Jane Austen actually is an astonishing piece of
both. Yeah. So I mean, first of all, you know, if you go into special operations, you're like, let's all read Henry V. And we're like, you know, band of brothers, and we're storming, you know, it's like, I mean, that's great and that's fine. It doesn't do anyone any harm or anything, but you want to get special forces in there reading Jane Austen because it forces them completely out of their own psychology. And that's the whole point, is to get out of your own head. That's the first step in growing, is to get in. Second of all, Jane Austen is brilliant. I mean, she invents this technology called, basically, she doesn't totally invent it, but she basically becomes the first person to use it, called free and direct discourse, which allows you to like people while being different from them. Up to that point, you know, novels had always existed, and they still mostly do now. You like people because they're like you. And that's how humans are, right? We like people who are like us. But the key
it's funny that, sorry to just, I'm like my monkey brain flicking, but the one form of fiction that I don't like is where the protagonist has a mental illness, because I feel that I can't live that life, because it's a life which is already being flawed. It's being destroyed by an ailment. So does that chime with what you're saying, or is that just random observation?
I don't, like, our society believes in mental illness. I do not believe in mental illness. I just believe that people are different. And the moment something gets stigmatized as an illness, of course, we all want to back away from it. I mean, this happens, you see this in animals. If animals see an animal behaving unpredictably or in a way they don't understand, they'll often just tear it apart, you know, because they get freaked out and they all gang together and destroy it, you know. But, you know, the capacity of humans, we have this capacity in us, is to say, just because something is different from me, it's not wrong, it's not sick, it's not ill. I want to open myself up to it, you know. But to your point, there's a lot of exploitive literature or whatever, which you know is kind of like suffering porn or whatever, where you read something and you want to feel better about yourself because you don't have whatever conditions the protagonist has, and that's not helpful. No. But a story.
But I think I meant I want to be in the protagonist. Yeah, I want to be I want to be subject to the waves of life which are hitting the protagonist. And kind of then guess at how I would react before the protagonist acts.
Yes.
And the problem when they would, yeah, I guess I'm just rejecting people constantly being irrational in their responses. Just like it becomes tiring because it becomes predictable in the fiction.
Yes,
the fiction should be unpredictable.
Yeah, and that's a badly written story. But there are wonderfully written books from the perspective of someone who thinks completely different. You know, I mean, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, I would say, is a great example of a story about a guy who's basically an unhinged absurdist character who, appears deranged to everyone who encounters him. But, when you enter his psychology, you're never able to figure him out. So he's endlessly interesting. And I think that's the point that you're making, is that there's bad writing, and bad writing turns, people with different psychologies into symptoms. And then it just repeats that symptom over and over and over again. And it is repetitive and stupid. And also, by the way, inauthentic to actually what it's like being in that person's brain, But if you were to read a compelling psychology of schizophrenia from that perspective of a novel, it would be endlessly gripping.
Yeah.
The same way, and so it just comes down to the quality of the writing.
So I wanted to ask as well, because so some people kind of are close and they think they get it. And they read. I've met, I want to call them stereotypically successful investors, let's call them. And they just read one genre, and they read books as though it's an inventory of data, and it's really data collection. And you're saying to the special forces, hey, read Jane Austen. And so they've fallen into a trap of the book delivers just X and it delivers more. How I would be fascinated to turn it personal with you, and with your guided notion now, what's your next book? How does the book find its way onto your Kindle or physically or whatever? Given that you're ready, you know how powerful this damn thing is already, does that, I don't know.
So in other words, how do I choose the next book that I read? So, this is the part. So I actually, I teach literature, or I have taught literature for a while. I'm sort of teaching other things now, but I started out teaching literature, and I kind of blew the minds of all the other faculty at the various places I taught, like Yale, Stanford, wherever, because I would walk into the classroom and I would say to each student in the classroom, what's your favorite book? We're going to read that book this semester. We're not reading any of my books. And so each student would put their favorite book on the syllabus, and I would learn all their favorite books. And then when we would go to upper level classes, I would say, find someone you respect in your family or in life or in the world, find out their favorite book. We're putting that on the syllabus. And so the way that I approach reading is I do it through people. I think everything in good in life comes through other people. The best things in life are friendships. And the best things in life are meeting new people. This is fun for me because I'm just I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe I'm hanging out with someone who's cool and interesting and different, who has broken the walls of reality and defied gravity. And I know you feel the same way when you meet someone new. That's how I get my books. I get my books through other people, and they say, Angus, here's a book. And if I open the book and if I read the first page and I find it incomprehensible, that's when I know I've got a good book. Because I'm I have no idea what's going on here. Recently I was asked to write an essay on a book called Carpentaria by Alexis Wright, she's an Australian Indigenous Aborigine novelist. And I read the first page of Carpentaria, and I literally read it probably 50 times. I was I have no idea what's happening. And this book is 500 pages long. And if you go on Goodreads or wherever, everyone just complains, oh, this book is impossible to understand. It's so incomprehensible. It's so stupid. Why couldn't you write an easier book? But I tell you what, if you stick with that book, like I did for day after day after day, it will click with you at some point and it will just explode your mind. And so that's always my approach. Find interesting people, get their books, and then challenge myself.
Because that makes me think I'm just weak. A, weak, and B, stupid. Because I'll give you a confession. So Russian literature, I hear it's good, or Eastern European. I have tried to read what's it called, the Czech. who did you have to read anything called The Unbearable Lightness of Being. I mean, what a title, Unbearable Lightness of Being. And I saw the movie first, Daniel Day-Lewis and Juliette Binoche. And I tried to read the book, but Eastern European or Chinese, this is how lame I am. I can't get it. And it's a bit like the Australian Aborigine. I can't decipher them when they have names that I'm not familiar with calling people Igor, and I can't pronounce the second name. And of course, they use the name in literally every sentence, and I'm like, I'm coughing up balls, and I stop. I'm weak, and I give up.
Yeah,
so
that's tremendous mental weakness you're displaying there, Hugh. Well, what I would suggest you do is just get a Kindle version and just do search and replace of Igor with Hugh.
Oh, you can do that.
Of course you do search and replace.
I didn't know that. I did not know that. That is.
I mean, and what you're expressing is a common problem. I mean, I read, for the last book that I wrote, I had to read, or had the privilege to read, Dream of the Red Chamber, which is the kind of classic Chinese novel, and I must have started that 50 times again because I mean, first of all, the opening passage is just like bizarre dream vision of like a rock coming to life and then someone crying from heaven. And then also you're like, what is going on? And the names are berserk from my perspective. I don't understand what's going on. But what happens is if you say to yourself, if I was 4 or 5 years old, I would have wonder at this. Actually, I would be amazed by different names because you see how children are when things are different. They're not like, oh, that's so hard. They're like, that's cool. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm either going to get destroyed by a 4-year-old or I'm going to suck this up and I'm going to learn to do this. I'm going to be. There's a famous story. I don't know if you know the Roman general Pompey.
I've heard of him.
So I would encourage everyone to read a biography of Pompey because he's just fascinating. He basically kind of boy genius, conquers basically, greatest general in the history of Rome, basically in his like 20s, just, beloved everywhere. And then basically in his middle age, he gets fat. He kind of retires to this villa, kind of on the coast of Italy, and basically just has no purpose and just kind of like wanders around, just eating a lot of food, a lot of beautiful slaves, kind of like filling his architecture and whatnot. And then he gets a challenger. There's another up-and-coming young general, and he realizes, I can't let this guy beat me. And so he returns to Rome, and he goes right to the center. There's the kind of, giant field in the middle of Rome, basically, where everyone kind of did their kind of warm-up exercises. And he's middle-aged and fat, and everyone is writing this in their, we have all these kind of, records. And in public, he's like, I'm going to train myself as though I was 18. And basically, this middle-aged guy just starts disciplining his body in public. Everyone thinks it's hilarious. And then, you know what? He comes back, he becomes a warrior again and enters the last chapter of his life and ultimately dies a warrior. And I think that is the invitation waiting for all of us in our middle age, is to say, I can be 18 again. It just takes mental strength, and the realization there's another chapter. I want to do it again. And I want to win, not because I want to win for myself, but because that's my destiny.
No,
that's what for everyone else, I have to win. So I think that's there.
I had a couple of things that came when you were talking. So it reinforces the idea of books being a virtual reality game. And I guess what I was saying is I'm a little bit too predisposed to I give too much thought to dressing my avatar. That is my representation in the game, which is and thank you. I will record. I will come back to you with my progress. I'm now thinking about funny names to use for all the characters in all these amazing books, which I haven't read. So new chapters await me. And you also said something very challenging, which I read, I think, in the Nautilus article, and I've been very poor at. So I've been out there going, you know what? Angus was telling me that AI will never write a book. Forget it, not gonna happen. Boom, and then you get a lot of. I mean, obviously, and rightly, you should get a lot of pushback on that claim. Can you just fortify me again with why you believe that's the case?
Well, it's not that I believe it's the case, it's the truth.
It's the truth. It just is the truth.
If we could get in a time machine and jump 300 years to the future, we will see a computer has still never written a novel. It just isn't going to happen. There's a lot of different ways to get at this. I can send you, I have a big formal proof outside of Nautilus, which I can send.
Can you actually say that, Angus, in the sense of the law of big, am I making this up? But the law of big numbers means that if you had an absurdly large sample of monkeys with typewriters, that you could say that one of them wouldn't produce Shakespeare.
Okay. So to handle that, is it possible that a computer could randomly, to your point, if we had billions and billions of computers operating over billions and billions of years, like those billions and billions of monkeys, generate Hamlet? Of course it is, because just through random stuff. But
not by design.
But the important thing is the computer wouldn't recognize it. No, it's not the question of design, it's a question of recognition. The computer wouldn't recognize it, and then after having written Hamlet, it would then go off to create garbage, right? And we could never extract that Hamlet from the infinite noise haystack. So the whole problem with this is the computer would never recognize it. But the main proofs are these. First of all, people do not understand Turing's proof of computation. So people will say, oh, well, Turing proved it. Computers can solve all problems. Therefore, eventually there's a way to solve this problem. Actually, if you go back and read Turing's proof, and I encourage everyone to do that, Turing, first of all, proves that there are problems, such as the halting problem, which computers can never solve. So Turing's point is that actually computers are not omniscient and will never be. The second thing is what Turing's proof establishes is that a computer can compute all computable problems. But if a problem is not computable, a computer will never do it. And narrative is one of those problems. And that's because narratives are chains of actions. Computers cannot handle thinking from cause to effect. To a computer, a cause has to equal its effect. This is the same thing that happened in medieval science, where logic was dominant. They thought causes equaled effects. It leads to symbolic action and magical thinking, and it does not work in the real world. It reduces the laws of physics to semiotics, essentially. Another reason that people think the computers will write novels is because people think that the human brain is a computer. As we've already established, that's not the case at all. The human brain operates differently. There's a million ways to kind of establish this, but it all comes down to the fact that people either understand how computers work, but don't understand how the brain works, or vice versa. But if you understand how both work, then, essentially it's the equivalent of saying, I think that a combustion engine is going to make toast. A combustion engine is never going to make toast. It's not a toaster, it's a different machine. And that's not an insult against a combustion engine. A combustion engine can make your car go really fast. A computer can crunch huge amounts of statistics, It's a giant math machine. Narrative is not math. Narrative is not associations. Narrative is not semiotic. These are all lies. And I understand why people think them, because a lot of our educational institutions treat literature as though it's semiotic. They tell you to interpret words on a page. But if you want to read any narrative theory, which is what I do, which is science as opposed to medieval science, literature, novels are not just words. They're also narratives. Narratives do not exist on the page because narratives require action. I mean, the simple thing here, I often say to people as an illustration is, imagine a flip book, with like a picture of someone moving, and you flip the pages fast enough and you see the person running across the pages. Where is the movement? Is the movement actually on the page? Are any of the pages actually moving? Are any of the images on it? No. The movement is created in your brain because your brain has an action processor in it. That action processor can create static images and imagine motion in them, just like we do in movie pictures and just like we do in novels. But if you then feed a movie or a novel to a computer, which does not have an action processor in it, it will never understand it and it will never be able to replicate it. So I understand we get a lot of pushback on this claim because people don't understand it. It's a little bit like being, Einstein, before 1919, or being Galileo. And it's like, imagine being, it being 500 years ago and, you being like, oh, by the way, the earth is going around the sun. And everybody being like, you're such a moron, dude. If the earth was going around the sun, why wouldn't I feel a breeze? I mean, it's so obvious that the earth is standing still. You're such an idiot. I mean, that's basically what AI people are like now. They're like those people. They're like, oh, you're so dumb, man. But actually, no. Actually, no. I don't want to break your mind or anything, but AI is not capable of doing what you think it's doing. Could we, in the future, build a machine that could write novels? Yes, we could. Yes, we could. But why do that? Because we already have one. It's called the human brain.
Okay.
You know? And there's no indication that a machine that we built to write novels will be faster at it than the human brain, because the whole thing about writing novels is it's inefficient. And it's not data heavy. So there's not really an advantage to scale in that same way.
Are we kind of close there with, and in fact, I think you're gainfully employed in narrative formulas, which have almost the presumption of not being made by man, being made to formula, to logic, to deliver a bounty of profit, in the sense of, I've seen you go on about a Disney product is a narrative, is a conceived narrative and a formula which repeats and repeats and repeats. Yeah. So isn't that as we're very close to that? That's a form of book by AI, no?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, human systems, we can basically create systems where we just operate like robots. It's not literally AI because it's narrative as opposed to logical. I mean, there's a technical distinction between narrative and logic, which we can walk over if we want to colloquially, but there is a difference between a Disney formula and a mathematical formula. A narrative formula and a mathematical formula are ontologically distinct. One of them is equations, the other is action, but you're right, they're both formulaic. And what is happening here, by the way, the other group of people who hate me, besides the kind of like Elon Musk AI nuts, are the Joseph Campbell people, because I mean, the hero's journey, as I never tire of saying to people, is actually bad. I mean, the idea that somehow there would be this formula that's like repeated over and over and over and over again. When that happens, it's the end of our species. We're going to get wiped out. The purpose of narrative is for us to evolve new plots and strategies in response to dynamic change, situations. And what Disney is basically doing is hooking us all up to refined sugar and just making us fat off this same narrative over and over and over again. And it's atrophying our natural ability to tell new stories and be dynamic and innovate. And so, sure, you can hack the system in the same way you can just mainline heroin in someone's brain and kind of hack our endorphin system and say, hey, isn't this great? We're mainlining heroin. It's like, yeah, it's great for like, a week, and then your head explodes and we all die. And, if you want a sustainable society in which you don't just have bliss for 30 seconds, but you actually have kids who are happy and grandkids who are happy and a sustainable life, and maybe even a species beyond us, which evolves out of humanity and goes on, if you want all of that, then you need new narratives. And that's the danger of Disney is, they're started by this, Ayn Randian guy, this plutocrat basically, who just essentially wanted to oppress what he viewed as the rest of our mediocrity. And he's wrong. We all have the capacity in us to be dynamic change makers. And I would encourage everyone out there, break free from Disney, break free from Joseph Campbell, break free from AI, break free from the myth, be an individual, have real heroism, go on a real journey and write the future rather than just kind of sitting back and watching the past and pretending like that's forever.
Oh, it's the Matrix. And with that notion of everyone, unfortunately, being so kind of unconsciously, plugged into something. Have you studied? I would think it'd be fascinating. They must, like Amazon and the Kindle, and there's now, again, forgive me, but there's a huge data dump. But I'd be intrigued at the relationships. Like, can they explain? Do Kindles and their contents, which are libraries? So for the first time ever, we actually have huge access into personal libraries. We never had any point in time. Just one or two rich folk, kings, bishops, and whatever. Now it's everywhere. Does it reveal? Does it reveal the age of narrative? The age of narrative sounds a glorious and a wonderful thing you would hope for, but also at the same time, actually, it sounds like something that is a manipulation. That narrative, and Disney has a narrative, and it forms something. And so I think I'm asking. They must have the data on these Kindle libraries, and are they just stuffed full of the sugary diet that popular consumption creates?
So a couple of things here. First of all, I don't have access to Amazon. I don't think Amazon trusts me to get into that data. But what I can tell you is that Netflix, who I have worked with, explicitly tries to do just what you're talking about. I mean, they basically say, like, we want to own the CEO. I can't remember when he said this at some point, but he said, like, we want to own that period just before you go to bed, basically. We want to get in your head and just kind of force you to kind of like iterate over and over and over again, like a kind of compulsive, these stories. We want you to binge watch in this unhealthy way. We want to hack your behavior. And I would just say, you know, that's something as a society which we should reject. That is predatory. We do not need that in our world. We do not need that, and that is not a good thing. So
you're talking to someone that uses DuckDuckGo. I'm not willing to have all of the content of my curiosity put into a web browser for nefarious purposes, you know.
I do.
Let's leave it there. You filled my jam jar. My jam jar of gratitude has a big pebble which is displacing all of the sand, all of the noise. Today I'm going to sleep the sleep of a contented man. So thank you, and then we'll keep in touch, and there are things that we should do more. We should do something. We're
both risk takers. We both like to do crazy, unprecedented things. Let's find a project in the future. Let's take a public risk together. Let's figure out something stupid that we can do. I'm 100% down.
Fantastic. I shall let you go. Thank you very much, Angus. Very, very generous. Thank you.
Enjoy.
Okay. Say hi to the kids. Bye.